All right, so get this. We're diving deep today into cyber threat information sharing. And, you sent over these excerpts from the Guide to Cyber Threat Information Sharing from NIST. And wow, this thing is dense. But that's what we're here for, right?
It's a really important topic. I mean, especially now, the threat landscape, it's evolving so rapidly, like no single organization can really keep up on their own anymore.
Exactly. So let's get right to it. What exactly is cyber threat information, and why should we care? I mean, you hear about threats all the time, right? But what's the actual intel we're talking about?
It's any piece of data that can help you understand, and more importantly, defend against cyber attacks. And think about it like this. You're building a defense against an enemy you can't see. Threat information is like having a spy. On the inside, giving you glimpses of their plans, their weapons, their movements.
Okay, so we're talking about more than just those scary headlines about data breaches.
Way more. We're talking specific IP addresses linked to phishing campaigns, malware samples, details about how they're exploiting certain software, even reports on what motivates these attackers. It's about connecting the dots, seeing the bigger picture.
So how does this actually play out in the real world? If I'm, say, a financial institution, what kind of threat information would be most relevant to me?
In finance, you'd be laser focused on things like indicators of attacks, targeting payment systems, maybe information on how ransomware gangs are adapting their tactics to hit financial institutions specifically. You'd also want to keep an eye on any vulnerabilities discovered in software commonly used in your industry.
That makes sense. So it's really about getting intelligence tailored to your specific needs and potential weaknesses.
Absolutely. And that's where the sharing comes in. One company might detect an attack using a certain malware variant. And by sharing the details, they could be preventing dozens of other companies from becoming the next victim.
That's amazing. So it's almost like a collective immune system for the digital world. The more we share, the stronger our defenses become.
That's a great way to put it. It's about tuning information into action. But it's not just about reacting to immediate threats. It's about proactively building stronger defenses, anticipating what might be coming next.
Speaking of proactivity, the guide digs into the various types of threat information out there. It's not just technical jargon, right?
Not at all. It can range from very technical data, like malware signatures, to higher-level analysis reports that break down the motives and tactics of specific attacker groups. It can even include best practice configurations for security tools.
Okay, so it's a whole spectrum of information. I imagine that makes it tricky to figure out what to share and with whom.
That's where things get interesting. You have to be strategic. What are your goals? What information is truly valuable to others? And how do you protect sensitive data while still sharing what's needed?
Those are some seriously big questions. What about the practical side of things? How do companies actually go about establishing these information sharing relationships?
Well, you have to start with identifying your existing sources of information. What are you already collecting? What security tools and systems are you using? Are there any industry-specific groups or communities you can join?
It's like taking inventory of your cybersecurity arsenal before heading into battle.
Precisely. And you have to define the scope of what you're willing to share, who you're willing to share it with, and under what conditions. Building trust is key, especially when dealing with sensitive information.
I can imagine that's a huge hurdle. It's like sharing trade secrets, right? You have to be careful who you trust.
Absolutely. The guide actually talks about the importance of clear information sharing rules. It's about establishing a framework for responsible and secure sharing.
So it's not just about blindly sharing everything you have.
Definitely not. It's about strategic sharing, determining what's valuable, what's safe to share, and who can benefit from it.
Okay, so we've got the basics down. What threat information is, why it's crucial, and some of the challenges involved in sharing it. Now, I'm curious about the actual mechanics of these sharing relationships. What are the different types of communities out there?
That's where things get really exciting. There are formal communities with strict membership rules, like ISACs, information sharing, and analysis centers, that are focused on specific industries. Then there are more informal communities, like online forums or groups, where security professionals can connect and share information.
So it's like choosing your battlefield right. Some are highly structured, while others are more like the Wild West.
Exactly. Each has its pros and cons. And choosing the right community depends on your needs, your industry, and the level of trust you need.
This is fascinating stuff. But it's also clear there's a lot to consider when it comes to cyber threat information sharing. It's more than just slapping some data on a message board.
It's definitely a complex landscape, but the potential benefits are enormous. By working together and sharing what we know, we can create a much stronger, more resilient cyber ecosystem.
That's an inspiring thought. And it leads perfectly into the next part of our deep dive. We're going to explore how to actually participate in these sharing relationships. How do you consume and use information effectively? How do you protect sensitive data? And how do you contribute to the collective knowledge pool?
We're going to unpack all that and more in part 2. Stay tuned. Welcome back to our deep dive into cyber threat information sharing. Last time we talked about the what and the why. Now let's get into the how.
Exactly. It's all well and good to talk about the benefits of sharing, but how do you actually put it into practice? Where do you even begin?
The NIST guide lays out a pretty clear roadmap. One of the first things it emphasizes is the importance of understanding your own cybersecurity posture. What are your crown jewels? What are your biggest vulnerabilities?
So it's about knowing yourself before you can even begin to understand the threats out there.
Exactly. You need to know what you're protecting and where your weaknesses lie before you can effectively leverage threat information.
That makes sense. It's like a doctor needing to understand a patient's medical history before prescribing treatment.
That's a great analogy. Once you have a solid understanding of your own environment, you can start thinking about what types of threat information would be most valuable to you.
Okay, so let's say I'm a company that's particularly concerned about ransomware attacks. What kind of information should I be looking for?
You'd want to be on the lookout for indicators of compromise, IOCs, associated with known ransomware groups, such as specific IP addresses, domain names, or file hashes. You'd also want to stay informed about the latest ransomware tactics and techniques, and any vulnerabilities that are being exploited.
So it's not just about collecting data, it's about making sense of it and applying it to your specific situation.
Precisely. The guide actually refers to this as operationalizing threat information. It's about turning data into actionable intelligence.
The guide also talks about this thing called the traffic light protocol. What's that all about?
Yes, the Traffic Light Protocol, or TLP, is a standardized system for indicating the sensitivity of information and how it can be shared. Think of it like a classification system for threat intelligence.
Okay, so like a top secret document versus something that's publicly available.
That's a good way to think about it. TLP uses color codes to represent different levels of sensitivity: red, amber, green, and white.
So red would be for highly sensitive information that should only be shared within a very limited circle.
Exactly. Information marked as TLP-RED might include details about ongoing investigations or vulnerabilities that haven't been patched yet. You wouldn't want that information falling into the wrong hands.
What about the other colors?
TLP Amber is for information that can be shared more broadly within a specific community or sector, but not publicly. TLP Green is for information that can be shared with a wider audience, such as the general cybersecurity community. And TLP White is for information that's considered public knowledge.
So using TLP helps ensure that information is shared appropriately and doesn't end up being misused.
Absolutely. It's a simple but effective way to manage the flow of information and protect sensitive data.
Now, we've touched on the importance of joining sharing communities, but how do you actually choose the right one? There seem to be so many options out there.
There are. It's important to consider your specific needs and goals. Are you looking for information about a particular industry? Are you looking to connect with peers in your region? Do you need access to highly sensitive information? Or are you more interested in general threat trends?
So it's about finding a community that aligns with your industry, your region, and the level of information you're looking for.
Precisely. And it's also important to consider the community's reputation and track record. Do they have a history of providing accurate and actionable information? Are they trusted by others in the industry?
It's like choosing a business partner, right? You want to make sure they're reliable and trustworthy.
Exactly. Building trust is crucial in any sharing relationship. You need to be confident that the information you're receiving is accurate and that your own information will be handled responsibly.
So let's say you've joined a sharing community and you're starting to receive a flood of threat information. How do you actually make sense of it all? It sounds like it could easily become overwhelming.
That's a valid concern. One of the keys to effectively consuming threat information is having a good process for triaging and prioritizing. You need to be able to quickly assess the relevance and urgency of the information you're receiving.
So it's about filtering the noise and focusing on the signals that are most relevant to your organization?
Exactly. The guide suggests using a system for categorizing information based on factors such as the source, the type of threat, the potential impact, and the level of confidence.
Okay, so you're essentially creating a system for ranking threats based on their potential impact and how likely they are to actually affect your organization.
That's right. And once you've prioritized the information, You need to decide what actions to take. Do you need to update your firewall rules? Do you need to patch a vulnerability? Do you need to educate your employees about a new phishing scam?
This all sounds incredibly complex. Seems like you need a dedicated team of experts just to manage this whole process.
It can be challenging, but it doesn't necessarily require a huge team. There are tools and technologies available that can help automate some of the tasks involved in consuming and operationalizing threat information.
So technology can play a role in making this whole process more manageable.
Absolutely. There are platforms that can aggregate threat information from multiple sources, help you analyze it, and even suggest actions to take.
That sounds incredibly helpful.
It is. But even with the help of technology, human expertise is still essential. You need skilled analysts who can interpret the information, connect the dots, and make informed decisions.
So it's a combination of technology and human expertise that makes this whole system work.
Exactly. And it's a constantly evolving field. The threats are always changing, the technology is always improving, and the best practices are constantly being refined.
Okay, so we're back for the last part of our deep dive, and we've covered a lot of ground already. But you know what I really like about the NIST guide is that it includes these real-world case studies.
Yeah, they really bring the whole concept of information sharing to life.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
can actually see how it plays out.
exactly. So let's jump into one. The guide talks about this case where a group of energy companies were being targeted by a pretty sophisticated nation-state actor.
Oh yeah, that one's fascinating.
What happened there?
So basically, these companies were all part of an Information Sharing and Analysis Center, or ISAC,
Hmm.
specifically for the energy sector.
So they had this pre-existing network already set up for sharing threat intelligence?
Exactly. And that turned out to be absolutely critical. So one of the companies, they detected some unusual activity on their network. It looked like a targeted spear phishing campaign, but they couldn't quite figure out, the motive or the ultimate goal.
But what did they do?
Well, they immediately shared the details of the phishing emails with their IS. Things like the senders address the subject line, the content of the messages.
And I'm guessing that's when things started to get interesting.
It is. Within hours, another company in the ISAC reported that they had received similar phishing emails, but they had also noticed some strange network traffic patterns associated with those emails.
Well, they were able to add another piece to the puzzle.
Exactly. And by combining their observations, they realized that the attackers were actually trying to install malware. That would give them access to the company's industrial control systems.
Whoa. Those systems control critical infrastructure, right? Like power grids, pipelines, that sort of thing.
Exactly. And the potential impact of a successful attack on those systems could have been catastrophic.
So what happened next? Were they able to stop it?
They were. By sharing information quickly and efficiently, they were able to identify the malware-developed signatures to detect it and block it before it could do any damage.
Wow. That is a really impressive example of how collective defense can work. But what about situations where the threat is less clear-cut? The guide also talks about this thing called campaign analysis.
Yeah, campaign analysis is really about looking for patterns and connections between seemingly unrelated events. It's about recognizing the bigger picture, the strategic intent behind individual attacks.
So it's like detective work, right? Connecting the dots to see the bigger picture.
Exactly. The guide gives an example of a group of cybersecurity analysts who were sharing information about various malware samples they'd encountered. And at first glance, these samples seemed completely unrelated. But then they started to notice some subtle similarities in the code.
So they started digging deeper.
They did. And through careful analysis and collaboration, they were able to determine that these seemingly disparate malware samples were actually all part of a larger campaign, orchestrated by a single group.
So it's like realizing that a series of seemingly random burglaries were actually all planned by the same criminal mastermind.
Exactly. And by understanding the attacker's overall strategy, they were able to develop much more effective defenses. They could anticipate the attacker's next move and proactively block those attacks.
This really highlights how information sharing can shift us from a reactive to a proactive security posture. It's not just about responding to attacks, it's about anticipating and preventing them.
Absolutely. And these real-world examples, they're just a small sample of the power of information sharing. There are countless other stories out there about how collaboration has helped organizations prevent breaches, mitigate damage, and improve their overall cybersecurity posture.
Well, these case studies have certainly been eye-opening. I think it's clear that cyber threat information sharing is not just some theoretical concept. It's a vital tool for organizations of all sizes.
I couldn't agree more. And I think the NIST Guide is a really valuable resource for anyone who's looking to understand the intricacies of sharing and how to make it work for them.
And I think the key takeaway here is that in the world of cybersecurity, we're all in this together. By sharing what we know, we can collectively raise the bar and create a safer digital world.
Well said. It's about collaboration trust
Hmm.
and a commitment to sharing knowledge for the greater good.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us. We hope you found this exploration insightful and empowering. Until next time, stay curious and stay secure.